Welcome to the Inside Story, brought to you by the Christian Post. I'm Billy Hollowell, and today I am joined by Ryan Foley from the Christian Post. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. We are going to be talking all things 2024, the Republican primary race, which is heating up. Very literally next week, we are starting, and I think we're going to be running to the races through November at this point. But there's so much to break down here. A lot of people are paying close attention, but some people, maybe they're not, and they want to get a little bit of a rundown of where we are right now. So when it comes to the 2024 Republican primary race, which candidates are still in the game?
Well, former President Donald Trump, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley, and entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy are the major candidates still remaining. Former New Jersey Governor Christie just dropped out. Former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson is still in the race, but he is seen as a long shot who is polling at less than 1%. And then there are some minor candidates who are still in it as well, but the Trump, DeSantis, Haley, and Ramaswamy are the four big ones.
Yeah, you brought up a couple of names there that people probably have forgotten about, but the four big ones, that's not a lot of people. I mean, we're kind of down to the wire at this point, and we're probably not that far away from other people dropping out of the race. Now, this past week, the big thing that went on in recent days was obviously this debate between Haley and DeSantis, and it was a particularly heated back and forth. A lot of people, again, they probably saw headlines about it, but not everybody had a chance to watch it. What were some of the big takeaways?
Well, the biggest takeaway is that they're both trying to differentiate themselves from President Trump, which now that Christie is out of the race, that was kind of his big thing. I think they're trying to do that to a certain degree, hoping that one of them will emerge victorious out of either Iowa or New Hampshire and therefore be the clear alternative to Trump. Nikki Haley talked about how, for me, it's very much about no drama, no whining, and getting results and getting them done. Adding, I don't think President Trump is the right president to go forward. So she kind of focused on the personality and style differences, whereas DeSantis focused on what he characterized as Trump's failure to deliver on campaign promises in 2016, specifically talking about building the wall and having Mexico pay for it, draining the swamp, and holding Hillary Clinton accountable. Another takeaway is that DeSantis is portraying Haley as close to the establishment as he makes his final pitch to voters, warning that she will cave to the woke mob every single time, and he cited the fact that she sided with Disney and invited them to South Carolina even though they were transing kids back when he was kind of fighting with the company over its opposition to the bill that would restrict the ability of teachers to talk about sexuality in grades K through 3. Then he also called her weak on immigration. And then Haley needlessly to say disagreed, which that's where the fireworks came from.
Yeah, and at this point, those fireworks are to be expected, obviously, because everybody is really vying for those top spots, right? And again, the next couple of days, we're going to really see this heat up. You mentioned Trump. Obviously, they're trying to differentiate themselves from Trump because he's been at the top of the pack in the polls, and yet has not appeared at any of these debates. And you just mentioned some of the ways that he was present, though, even though he wasn't physically present, he's still very much a part of that conversation, which I think is interesting, and it shows the hold that he still really does have over the Republican Party, with the majority of voters, saying that they would choose him over any of these other candidates. Yet, you were still seeing Haley and others, particularly Haley, grow in the polls in terms of popularity. But how does Christie dropping out of the race, in your view, impact the field moving forward? Because that is a pretty big moment that happened, and here we are, just days away from the next big steps here.
Well, in theory, his dropping out would help Nikki Haley in New Hampshire since the polls show her closing in on Trump there, and both Christie and Haley have the same type of constituency, which is basically moderate voters who are sick of Trump and not necessarily registered Republicans, because New Hampshire, anybody can vote in the primary. Whoever Christie was caught on a hot mic saying she's going to get smoked, and he hasn't endorsed her. So It's not entirely sure that all of his voters will automatically go to her, but it looks safe to say that they will not go to Trump, since the whole point of his campaign was opposition to Trump. So that means his voters will either stay home or go to one of the other non-Trump candidates, basically
Yeah.
either Haley or DeSantis. I doubt they would go to Ramaswamy.
It is interesting because he was so overtly anti-Trump, whereas she is in her rhetoric, but at the same time, she's not running on that, right? She's really kind of capturing people, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but she seems to be capturing people in the middle or independents, or as you were saying, people who are tired of Trump, but they're lifelong Republicans and they want to see calmness maybe come back into the White House in some way while also holding on to their values. It's interesting watching that because I see her as an asset to Trump. Like, let's say he is the candidate. I see her as a big VP potential asset because she captures people that he doesn't necessarily capture. And I think that's going to be interesting to watch. Whereas some of the others, he's kind of competing with the same audience with DeSantis, right? And some of the others. So that will be fun to watch unfold. But we're a little ways away from, declaring Trump the nominee and who he's going to pick for VP, but still interesting to think about. What are the current polls showing in Iowa, obviously, as we're marching toward Iowa, and then even nationally beyond that?
Well, in Iowa, Trump is at 53.6% in the Real Clear Politics average of polls. Haley is at 17.2%, DeSantis is at 15.2%, and Ramaswamy is at 6.8%. Whereas nationally, Trump is at 61.1%, Haley is at 11.3%, and DeSantis is at 10.9%.
Yeah, that is interesting. One of the other sets of numbers that I have found fascinating with Real Clear Politics are the general election matchups. When you look at Trump versus Biden, Trump consistently, and he's lost a little bit of that lead, but he's up 1 percentage point right now over Biden in a hypothetical. And but consistently, DeSantis has not been up over Biden. In a head-to-head, Biden has just edged him out a little bit. But the candidate who does perform, and again, this is fascinating, the strongest in the Real Clear Politics polling against Biden is Nikki Haley. And that has been pretty consistent throughout the entirety of this campaign. So, not that matters to the primary here, but it is sort of fascinating to watch that unfold. So when we look at Iowa, because that's the next big event here, or rather the first big event truly of 2024, what experts, if any, suspect that there could be an upset, that Trump might not get it, or is he the inevitability here?
Well, Bob Vanderplatz of the Family Leader, which is a faith-based organization in Iowa, for the record, he has endorsed DeSantis, but he seems to think an upset in Iowa is possible. He thinks that DeSantis is going to overperform expectations there, while Trump and Haley are going to underperform. Officials with the Faith and Freedom Coalition, another big faith-based group, which has people on the ground in Iowa, but it's a national organization, they're much more bullish on the idea that Trump is going to win based on the polling and, to a certain extent, other factors on the ground. But Ralph Reed told reporters, he's the head of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, that this thing is far from over. The nomination process tends to be a marathon, not a sprint. If you end up with a shocking outcome in one of these first three states, meaning Iowa, New Hampshire, or South Carolina, you're going all the way to at least Super Tuesday and possibly well beyond that. So they're not ruling it out, but I think ground game is an important factor people are taking into consideration when they're looking at the possibility of an upset. And both Faith and Freedom Coalition and Vanderplatz talk about DeSantis as having a good ground game, but also the polls show Trump is on top. So it's
it'll be interesting
up
to
in the air.
see, right, where this all shakes out. And again, we'll be able to see that in just a few days here. But as always, Ryan, I appreciate your time breaking it all down. There's so much going on here, and your wonderful reporting on this can be viewed over at the Christian Post. And I'd encourage people to stay tuned there to see what comes next. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Everyone else, make sure you tune in next week for another episode of The Inside Story brought to you by the Christian Post, and head over to christianpost.com for all the news you need to read. We'll see you next week.